My first child arrived when I was in seminary, and my husband was also in school working on his professional degree. We split up time with our new baby pretty evenly, with Andrew probably taking on a little more of the daily care of our infant. It did not take me very long to notice that whenever I was out and about without my baby, someone would invariably ask this question: who is watching the baby today? It never seemed to occur to people that her other parent was watching her. Or even worse, sometimes the question would be, is Daddy babysitting today? No, I wanted to respond. He is parenting today, because he is a parent. I asked Andrew how many times someone had asked him on the days I was with our child. How many times someone had asked him who was watching the baby? Guess how many times? 0. There was this prevailing assumption that, of course, I was home with the baby because I am the mom. Now, no one who asked me these questions meant any harm. All of them were people who cared about us and were interested in our lives. And most of them were folks who had parented children already. So they knew something about what moms and dads do. This was part of the problem. It is easy when you have experience in a relationship to generalize about how other relationships like that should or do work. I don't think anyone really thought that my husband was incapable of taking care of our baby. They just didn't think about it. It turns out there is more than one way to be a father to a little child. There's more than one way for that relationship to work, which is a good thing, because there is also more than one way to be a kid and more than one way to be a family. In our gospel this morning, we find a perfectly intelligent and competent man caught in a situation similar to that of the folks who used to ask me who was watching the baby. Nicodemus gets made fun of a lot, and I do not believe our gospel portrays him as an idiot. He is just a person who knows how things work. And inside the world of the life, religion, and culture that Nicodemus knows, he is doing everything right when it comes to Jesus. He comes to Jesus at night. This is significant symbolically because Nicodemus is spiritually in the dark, but it is not a sneaky or inappropriate time for religious scholars of that day to have a conversation. Nicodemus offers Jesus a respectful opener that acknowledges who Jesus is to the best of his ability. Rabbi, we know that you are from God, for no one could do the signs you do apart from God's presence. It should be an opener to a typical back and forth between respected teachers. And instead, Jesus astounds Nicodemus by talking about something Nick had no idea was coming: a second birth from above, a spirit that moves like the wind, and a description of God's love that is beyond the bounds of anything Nicodemus is ready to hear. Now understand, these are not esoteric words in this conversation. Nicodemus is an observant Jewish person of his day who is also a religious leader. Nicodemus is counting on his identity as a Jew, his religious beliefs and his reputation and education to get him where he needs to go in the world. These things, they are his first birth. the things he has known and grown into for Nicodemus's entire life. And Jesus is basically saying, no, you need to start again. Let go of all that and imagine a whole new thing. Nicodemus has this one good, established way of understanding who God is and how God works. In Nicodemus's mind, you are either with God or you are against God, from God or not. And Jesus is telling him there is a third option. Jesus is God. This means God is a lot more complicated than Nicodemus thinks, which is a good thing. But it is a tough thing for Nicodemus because it requires him to shift his thinking, to expand how he thinks the relationship between God and people and the world works. That's the thing about God. Whenever we think we know the stuff, whenever we feel like there is a good, familiar way of being in relationship with God and each other, well, we end up with Nicodemus, asking the dumb question and getting our minds blown open by how wide and deep and big the love of God can be. This is the thing that good old Nick cannot wrap his mind around in this story. God so loved the world that God sacrificed God's own self for that world, not to condemn it, but to save it. God's love is wild, like the wind, and willing to risk everything for the chance to save you and me and any part of this creation that can be saved. This is Trinity Sunday. It's a weird day because sometimes preachers get the idea that we are supposed to use our time to explain the Trinity to you. If you're not familiar, the Trinity is the core Christian belief that God is one being in three persons. And I'm not going to explain that because the Trinity is not an explainable thing. And that's not what sermons or Trinity Sundays are for. This is a day not to attempt to tame or control our three-in-one God, but to behold God, to sit in front of the Trinity and marvel. Our God is mind-blowing, this three-in-one who we worship every week at this table and every day through how we live and pray and love. It is so easy for us to end up in either or thinking when it comes to God and when it comes to God's love. You are either for us or against us. It's my way or the highway. We can name all the binaries our world pushes onto us every day. Israel or Gaza, men or women, progressives or conservatives, East Coast or West Coast, black or white, and so many more. But these binary ways of thinking put us right next to Nicodemus, asking questions that are too narrow for God's big, wide love, and thinking thoughts that are too small for the plans that God has for us to experience and live that love. The people who gave us this church, the people who lived after Nicodemus and kept on thinking and learning and loving God as the Christian way was being formed, they realized this. They realized that, yes, there is one God, one love, and in that respect, one way, truth, and life. And yet, that one God is also diverse and relational. God is not one lonely person. And God isn't two people who only have eyes for each other. God is three, a Trinity, a stable tripod of continuously moving, changing, sacrificing, and creating love. This is the best way we have to talk about our God who will always break the metaphors we make to describe the many ways God loves and the many ways God calls us into relationships of love with God and with each other. So, because of our Trinity, we have permission to always be looking for a third way, because that's what God does, and that's who God is. We have permission right there in the mysterious and unfathomable nature of our God to be curious instead of defensive when we encounter ways of being and living and loving that we do not understand. We worship a God that is one love in three persons, such a difficult thing for those of us who are raised to think that one is the most important number or that there is only one right way. God invites us into love, sometimes by blowing our minds, sometimes by listening patiently to our small questions, and sometimes by giving us people to love who are so different than we are that we need to expand how we live and how we understand in order to discover God in them. So here's the challenge of our gospel this morning: to keep talking about the things we don't understand or agree upon, to keep our eyes open for the God whose love is bigger than anything we know how to explain, and to behold the Trinity by responding to the binary pressures of our world by seeking a third way, a way that is true to the radical love God has for all of this world, so that we can not only know God's love, but be God's love in a world that all of our God loves and wants to save.